We come together today, here in the heart of the Amazon, at a pivotal moment in human history. A moment that demands courage.
Everything inside the palace just changed. Prince William's DNA test results had finally been revealed, and the truth, it sent shockwaves rattling through the entire royal family. What was supposed to be a private, routine check had suddenly turned into a dangerous secret, one that everyone inside those gilded walls was desperate to understand. Whispers slipped through the corridors, phones rang non-stop, and every room seemed thick with shock and disbelief. No one could predict the fallout, what this would do to the crown, the family, or the perception of the monarchy itself. One thing was certain. This door, once opened, could never be shut. The real storm, the one no one could prepare for, was only just beginning. Step inside as we explore the letter that changed everything. Prince William sat in his study at Kensington Palace, the polished mahogany desk under his hands, sorting through the morning's correspondence with his usual calm efficiency. He reached for his coffee, still warm, when a gentle knock on the door broke the quiet. "Your Royal Highness, the medical documents you requested have arrived," said his assistant, sliding a thick manila envelope onto the desk before retreating quietly. William nodded absent-mindedly, his thoughts already racing ahead to the morning's schedule. The DNA test had been simple, routine even, nothing dramatic, just a precaution, a clarification of genetic markers, something his doctor had recommended to check family health history. He slid open the envelope with his letter opener, expecting perhaps 3 or 4 pages, but froze as he pulled out the contents. The stack was far thicker than it should have been. 15 pages. 15! Why would a basic medical report require this much? The first few pages looked normal enough. Standard medical jargon, charts, percentages, technical terms that barely registered. He skimmed quickly, searching for the simple summary his doctor had promised, the one line that would explain everything. Then he turned to page 7, and his entire world stopped spinning. The room suddenly felt smaller, the air heavier, almost suffocating. William read the line again, certain he had misread it, then a third time. But the words remained, stark on crisp white paper, black ink spelling out something impossible, something that couldn't possibly be true. His hands began to shake, first slightly, then noticeably. The paper rustled in his grip. He set down his coffee cup before it could spill, barely registering the movement. His eyes stayed locked on the document, scanning the technical language, searching desperately for a mistake, for a loophole, for anything that would allow him to ignore the truth. A clerical error, someone else's report mixed in with his. Impossible. Every page bore his name, birth date, reference number. William stood abruptly, the chair scraping harshly across the wooden floor. He moved to the window, pressing one hand against the cool glass, struggling to steady himself, searching outside the palace for normalcy. The gardens stretched peacefully before him, serene and untouched. Gardeners moved about their morning routines. Security officers patrolled their paths. Everything looked as it always had, yet nothing would ever feel the same again. He returned to his desk, forcing himself to read the next pages carefully. Now the document went far beyond what he had requested. Genetic profiles he had never asked to see. Technical analyses of paternal lineage that far exceeded any doctor's recommendation. Page after page told a story he had never wanted, never imagined could exist. One section compared markers against known royal family profiles. Another revealed statistical probabilities that made his stomach churn. A third contained dates and reference numbers, suggesting the tests had been repeated in multiple labs. As if someone wanted to be absolutely certain of the results, William's mind raced with possibilities, each more unsettling than the last. Had someone made a catastrophic mistake at the lab? Had samples been switched, mislabeled, contaminated? No. The report was thorough, cross-checked against multiple databases, meticulous. This wasn't the error of a careless technician. This was deliberate, careful, and devastating. He thought of his childhood, of his mother, of the endless gossip and speculation that had surrounded the royal family for decades. Rumours he had always dismissed as tabloid fiction, desperate inventions to fill pages. He had grown up knowing that conspiracy theories swirled like autumn leaves in the wind, annoying, persistent, ultimately meaningless. Except now, in his hands, lay evidence suggesting some whispers weren't whispers at all. They were quiet truths, spoken too softly to be heard. William sank back into the leather chair, creaking under his weight, spreading the pages across his desk, searching for patterns, for anything that might make sense of this nightmare. Years of crisis training, military discipline, a lifetime of maintaining composure under pressure, all seemed useless. The office blurred at the edges, bookshelves stacked with history, biographies of ancestors, portraits of family generations. Everything solid now felt like stage props in a play where he had never known his true role. He picked up one page in particular, studying a chart with yellow highlighted genetic markers. Dense technical language, but the conclusion was impossible to ignore. Probability percentages were stark. The comparisons were clear. This wasn't speculation, not theory. This was science, cold, precise, and devastating. His phone buzzed. A reminder for a meeting he could no longer fathom attending. Charitable initiatives, agricultural policies, diplomats, budget reviews, impossible. His thoughts shifted to his father, King Charles, probably having breakfast at that very moment. Did he know? Had he always known? Was this why certain childhood photographs had carried odd tension? Why some family dynamics never made sense? Why his mother's gaze had mixed protectiveness with sadness? William strode to the door, report clutched tight, resolve hardening. There was only one person who might explain this, who could untangle everything he thought he knew about himself. His father had to answer, now. The confrontation could not wait. His footsteps echoed through palace corridors, each step heavier than the last, burdened with questions that shouldn't exist. Morning light streamed through tall windows, too bright, too cheerful for what was about to unfold. Protocol meant nothing. William pushed open the heavy oak door without hesitation. King Charles looked up from his papers, surprise flickering across his face, reading glasses perched on his nose, a steaming cup of tea at his elbow, papers scattered across the desk. Ordinary, comfortable, familiar. It made what William was about to do feel even more unreal. Charles set down his pen, his expression shifting from surprise to concern. He could see this wasn't about policy, schedules, or mundane conflicts. Something deeper had shattered, and the air between them felt electric with tension. William crossed the room, placing the report on the desk between them. The pages glowed almost accusingly against the dark wood, like a spotlight exposing a truth no one could ignore. In the heavy silence, Charles picked up the first page, eyes scanning the text with a mix of curiosity and dread. William watched his father carefully, searching for any flicker of recognition, any hint of guilt or confirmation. What he saw was worse than he had prepared for. Charles's expression crumbled. First confusion, then understanding, and finally something that looked like raw fear. The king sank back into his chair, still gripping the report, hands trembling ever so slightly. He asked quietly where William had gotten it, but William's frustration rose, sharp and undeniable. That wasn't the question. Not whether it was true, not how it had come to be, just where it came from. The real question, the one that cut like a blade between them, hung in the air. Was any of this true? Charles set the papers down, pressing his fingers to his temples for what felt like a long, unbearable moment. He said nothing. The silence stretched like a tightrope until William felt he might scream, just to shatter it. There were rumours, Charles finally admitted, voice barely above a whisper. Years ago, before you were born, even after. But they were just rumours, the kind that always swirl around this family. William felt the edges of his composure fray. His father had known there were questions, doubts, and he had never said a word. Charles looked up, genuine anguish in his eyes, and explained how people constantly scrutinised the family, inventing stories from photographs, public appearances, or idle speculation. He couldn't take every whisper seriously. It would drive a person mad. William gestured toward the report, his voice rising. This isn't a whisper, father. This is science. This is evidence. Charles stood, agitated, pacing slightly. He pointed out something William hadn't considered. The report wasn't just a medical test. It was far more comprehensive. Someone had deliberately created this, intentionally ensuring William would see it. The thought hit him cold. His father was right. Someone wanted this moment to happen. The report was too detailed, too thorough, too deliberate to be ordinary. But that didn't answer the deeper question. William's voice shook as he asked if Charles would have ever told him. If this hadn't landed on his desk, would he have spent his whole life never knowing there were doubts about who he really was? You are my son, Charles said firmly, meeting William's eyes. That has never been in doubt. Not for me. Not ever. But that wasn't what William had asked. Silence filled the room, heavy with unspoken questions. Charles walked to the window, his back to William. Morning sun illuminated the silver in his hair, highlighting lines of age and strain, making him look older, more fragile than William usually noticed. He spoke carefully of the difficulties in his marriage, the periods of distance and tension, the world knowing the rough patches. Yes, there were rumours, cruel and vicious ones, but nothing ever proven, because there was nothing to prove. William demanded answers about the report. Charles turned to him, calm but resolute. He couldn't explain without knowing how it had been created, who authorized the testing, where the comparison samples had come from. Genetic testing wasn't simple. This had required access to royal family profiles, historical samples, and vast databases. Someone with immense resources had done this deliberately. William's mind raced. His father's points were logical, but felt like deflection, like the careful answer of a politician fielding a scandal. What were they supposed to do now? Charles returned to his desk, expression hardening into resolve. They needed a trusted genetic advisor, someone discreet, with impeccable credentials. They had to verify every detail before reacting, before making a single move public. William's voice was hollow. What if it's true? What if the conclusions are accurate? Then we deal with it as a family, Charles said thoughtfully, carefully, without panic. William wanted to argue, to demand immediate answers his father couldn't provide, but beneath the hurt and confusion, he recognized the wisdom in caution. A scandal like this could destroy everything they'd built, everything they represented. He told his father he needed time to process, time to understand, time to prepare for what might come. Neither noticed the shadow moving silently along the corridor outside. Footsteps retreated across the marble floor, quiet, unnoticed. But the secret had been heard. Soon, what should have remained buried would start leaking like poison through palace walls. The junior assistant had been working at the palace for just 6 months. Young, eager, amazed every day to walk the same halls as royalty. That morning, delivering fresh linens to the upper floors, she should have ignored the raised voices behind the king's office door. She knew better, but something in Prince William's tone froze her in place. She pressed closer to the wall, listening to words never meant for her ears. DNA report, paternal lineage, rumours confirmed. Her heart raced. She hurried away before anyone could see her, but the information burned in her mind like fever. By lunchtime, she couldn't stop thinking about it. By afternoon, she had made a decision that would change everything. She found a journalist's number online, someone known for breaking royal stories. Her hands shook as she typed the message on her personal phone in a coffee shop 3 blocks from the palace. I have information about a bloodline crisis in the royal family, something they're trying to hide. Response came within minutes. The journalist demanded a meeting, proof, details. She didn't have proof, not yet, but she had heard enough. That was enough to spark a fire. Within hours, whispers surfaced on social media. Vague posts, anonymous accounts, cryptic tweets hinting at royal scandal. Nothing concrete, but enough smoke to make everyone search for flames. Posts multiplied, discussion forums exploded with speculation. Curious citizens, royal watchers, conspiracy theorists, all asking the same questions. What's happening at the palace? Why the security increase? What are they hiding? The palace communications team was blindsided. William sat in private quarters with Catherine, the DNA report spread across the table. He had told her everything, his voice breaking, explaining what the pages revealed, the implications for his entire identity. Catherine listened silently, her hand holding his. When he finished, she paused, absorbing the weight of the news. We'll get through this, she said, voice steady, eyes revealing worry, but determination too. Whatever the truth is, we'll face it together. Even as she spoke, she could feel the storm brewing, growing closer, ready to hit. Her phone buzzed, then William's. Both lit up with warnings, notifications, messages from advisors, security alerts. Something was happening online. Charles, in the middle of reviewing agricultural reports, barely had time to react when his private secretary burst in, tablet in hand, face pale. The king's stomach sank at the trending topics. Immediate action was needed. An emergency meeting was called. Senior advisors, communications directors, legal counsel, security chiefs. Within 20 minutes, they were assembled in the private conference room, faces grave, voices hushed, Palace corridors buzzed with unusual activity. Staff moved quickly, whispering to each other, sensing something major unfolding. Security protocols quietly tightened, certain entrances restricted. Extra guards appeared at key positions, their eyes scanning corridors with precision. Charles stood at the head of the conference table, jaw set, every line of his face taut with determination. They needed to control this situation before it controlled them. They needed a clear strategy, a unified message, a way to stop the hemorrhage before it became a full-blown crisis. But how do you fight a story when you don't even know what's being said? When rumours outrun facts, when the truth itself is still murky, panic can take root fast. Advisors debated every angle. Should they issue a denial, ignore it completely, launch an internal investigation to trace the leak? Every option carried risks, every path riddled with pitfalls. Phones around the table buzzed and chimed non-stop, flashing updates as the online chatter grew louder by the minute, spreading like wildfire through unseen networks. News outlets were beginning to sense blood in the water, carefully crafting headlines to avoid libel yet clearly sniffing scandal. William sat back in his study, trying to process how quickly a private crisis had become public property. He felt exposed, the walls of the palace suddenly thinner than ever, as if even the solid stone could not shield him from what was coming. When an email notification chimed, he almost ignored it. His inbox was flooded with messages. Concerned friends, curious acquaintances, reporters fishing for comments. But the sender's name made his blood run cold. James Mitchell, senior correspondent for one of Britain's largest newspapers. The subject line was simple. Cold. We need to talk. William's hand hovered over the mouse. Part of him wanted to delete it, pretend it didn't exist, but he knew better. There was no escaping this. He clicked. The email was brief, professional, and devastating. William read it twice, then a third time, his mind reeling at the implications, heart pounding as reality crashed down. His hands went numb. Mitchell had the documents. Not rumours, not speculation, the evidence itself. The storm wasn't coming. It had already arrived inside the walls, and there was nowhere left to hide. The choice between truth and silence weighed on him like a leaden cloak. William made his decision in the darkest hours of the night, while the palace slept and his children dreamed peacefully in their beds. Catherine lay beside him, trying to hide her worry, but he stared at the ceiling, mind racing. He couldn't hide behind palace walls or legal threats. If someone had his private medical information, planning to publish it, he had to face them directly, as himself, not as a title or an institution. By morning, he had sent his reply. He would meet the journalist alone, just the two of them. Security teams objected immediately. Advisors called it reckless. Even Catherine, always his anchor, questioned the wisdom of it. But William's mind was made up. This wasn't protocol or strategy anymore. This was about his life, his identity, his truth. They chose a quiet spot along the Thames, far from the palace, away from prying eyes, a bench along a walking path, early joggers passing by, unaware that 30 feet away, a prince was about to negotiate with a journalist over the future of the monarchy. James Mitchell arrived exactly on time, carrying a leather messenger bag and an expression that was neither hostile nor friendly. Older than William expected, maybe in his 50s, with streaks of grey in his hair and lines around his eyes hinting at decades of chasing stories, he seemed every bit the seasoned professional. They sat at opposite ends of the bench. Neither spoke. The river flowed past, indifferent to the gravity of the moment. William broke the silence first, asking to see what Mitchell had. The journalist hesitated, then pulled a folder from his bag. Inside were photocopies, slightly grainy, but perfectly legible, the very pages from the DNA report that had shattered William's world days ago. The highlighted sections, the comparison charts, the devastating conclusions. William's jaw tightened. Someone had handed Mitchell everything, not just summaries or hints, but actual confidential documentation. He asked the journalist where it had come from. Mitchell's answer was simple. Someone felt the public had a right to know. William's eyes narrowed. The public's right to know, that phrase. The mantra of journalists. The justification for turning private pain into entertainment, for tearing apart lives in the name of transparency. He leaned forward, voice quiet but sharp. Do you have children? The question caught Mitchell off guard. He nodded slowly. 2 daughters. William painted a picture, his own children, innocent and young, waking to see their father's identity questioned across every news site and television screen. Schools filled with cruel questions, a family at risk, not because of truth or lies, but because of speculation and scandal. A nation watching, its institutions tested, its stability shaken. "This isn't just about me," William said, voice low but firm. "Publishing this now, without verification, damages lives before accuracy is even established." Mitchell listened, mask slipping, revealing a human under the journalist's professionalism. "These are serious allegations," he said. "If true, the public deserves to know. Line of succession, legitimacy of the crown, they aren't private matters." William countered, "And if it's false? If misinformation, deliberate or accidental, is published anyway, what then? You can't unring that bell." The journalist was silent. Both understood the weight of that truth. William requested just 24 hours to verify, to conduct proper testing through legitimate channels, to understand what they were really dealing with. Then, regardless of the outcome, he would address it publicly. No hiding, no cover-ups. Just time to separate truth from speculation, to avoid making a mistake that could haunt the family forever. Mitchell studied him. The internal struggle was visible, duty to break news versus recognizing the cost of the story, the lives it could destroy. Finally, he agreed, but with a warning. "With or without your statement, I'm publishing. The story is already leaking. If I don't, someone else will. Probably with less care for accuracy." William nodded. It wasn't much, but it was something. He stood, shook the journalist's hand, and walked back to the waiting car, security discreetly trailing. The drive back to the palace felt longer than usual. William watched London waking to its ordinary day, wondering how many would see him differently. Catherine, anticipating his return, had already begun making the necessary calls. They needed independent testing, separate from any royal medical system, results that no one could question. By afternoon, a genetic specialist was found. Impeccable credentials, no royal connections, a lab experienced in sensitive, discreet cases. The doctor agreed to see William immediately, understanding urgency without a full explanation. Catherine accompanied him, hand in his, sitting close as the doctor outlined the process. A simple cheek swab, results in a few hours, definitive and confidential. William asked to know every detail, every marker, every test. "I need to know everything," he said quietly. The swab took seconds, a small, simple action that could upend centuries of history. The doctor labelled the sample carefully, promising complete confidentiality, results ready by morning, and reassured them once more that no information would leak, that everything would remain private until verified. William and Catherine returned to find the palace in barely controlled chaos. Staff moved with unusual urgency, advisors clustered in corners whispering in low voices, and the communications office worked around the clock, preparing statements for scenarios they prayed would never materialize. Charles looked as if he had aged a decade in 3 days, each line on his face a map of worry and sleepless nights. William found his father in the library, staring at portraits of their ancestors. Faces gazed down from the walls with expressions of certainty and authority that now felt hollow and distant. They didn't speak at first. What was there to say that hadn't already been said? The king's guilt hung heavy in the air, suffocating, all the years of unasked questions, unspoken doubts, buried secrets that should have been addressed when William was young enough to process them, before they became weapons in a stranger's hands. Charles finally spoke, his voice rough and tired. He said he was sorry, not just for the current crisis, but for everything that had led to it, the dysfunction in his marriage, the environment that created doubts, and for never having had the courage to confront the rumours directly. William didn't know if he was ready to forgive, but he recognised the raw pain in his father's confession, the heavy weight of decades now laid bare between them. Both were trapped, waiting for science to confirm who they truly were. The communications team worked through the night on 2 versions of a public statement. One, if William's royal lineage was confirmed, one, if it was not. Both carefully worded, both prepared for maximum damage control, acknowledging that speculation had reached a point where silence was no longer an option. Outside the palace walls, the world buzzed with anticipation. Social media blazed with theories, news outlets prepared special coverage, and royal experts were booked for interviews. Everyone sensed something enormous was about to break. William barely slept, lying awake beside Catherine, her hand in his, both pretending not to be terrified of what morning might bring. His phone sat on the nightstand, silent for now, but ready to deliver news that could define the rest of his life. He thought of his mother and wondered what she would say if she were here. Would she have answers? Would she scold him for opening this door? Or would she understand that sometimes painful truth is the only path forward? The hours crawled by. Outside, the darkness softened into dawn. Somewhere across London, technicians analysed his DNA, comparing markers and running tests to answer questions he never wanted to ask. His phone lit up just as the first light touched the horizon. The caller ID displayed the doctor's private number. William's hand shook as he reached for it. Catherine sat up beside him, eyes wide, alert despite the early hour. This was it. The moment everything either fell apart or came together. After all the speculation, fear, and uncertainty, he answered on the third ring. The doctor's voice was calm and professional. The results were ready. Could William come to the office immediately? This wasn't information to be shared over the phone. William said yes. He would be there within the hour. Whatever the envelope contained, whatever the test results said, they would face it together. The world was about to learn the truth. The moment, everything changed. The doctor's office was quiet when William arrived. Catherine had offered to come, but he needed to face this alone. Some truths must be confronted in solitude, absorbed privately before they can be shared, even with the person you love most. The doctor sat across from him, a manila envelope resting on the desk. Between them, it looked ordinary, unremarkable, just paper and ink. But William knew it contained answers that would reshape everything he thought he knew about himself. The doctor explained the testing process one final time. Independent laboratory, multiple verification steps, comparisons against established genetic markers, every measure to ensure accuracy and confidentiality. Everything had been done with the highest scientific rigor. The results were definitive. William nodded, throat tight, and reached for the envelope. His hands were steadier than he expected as he broke the seal, maybe because part of him already knew, maybe because after days of fear and speculation, there was relief in finally knowing. Even if the knowing destroyed him, he pulled out the report, scanning the technical language, charts, and percentages, searching for the conclusion he both dreaded and needed. And there it was, clear, scientific, undeniable. The second test confirmed the first. The genetic markers didn't match. The paternal lineage showed discrepancies that could not be explained by testing errors or laboratory mistakes. The truth was written in his DNA, encoded in every cell of his body. He wasn't who everyone believed him to be. William sat perfectly still, the paper trembling slightly in his grip, feeling everything and nothing at once. Heartbreak that the father who raised him might not be his biological father. Anger that this secret had been kept from him, that his identity had been built on a foundation now crumbling. And strangely, clarity. After days of uncertainty, he had an answer. The doctor asked gently if he was all right. William nodded, his voice too choked to trust. He carefully placed the report back in the envelope, thanked the doctor, and stepped out into the morning light, which felt unnaturally bright, almost cruel in its normalcy. Catherine was waiting in the car. She took one look at his face and understood everything. She asked no questions, demanded no details. She simply held his hand as they drove back to the palace, back to a life that would never be the same. In his private quarters, William finally allowed himself to break. Catherine held him as reality crashed in waves, everything he had been raised to be, every responsibility he had accepted, every public appearance representing a bloodline that was apparently not his. All of it felt like a lie. Now, Catherine's voice cut through his spiral. She reminded him that DNA did not define who he was. He was still the man dedicated to service, the father who loved his children fiercely, the person who earned respect through his own actions and character. Blood didn't make a person. Choices did. Her words helped, but could not erase the fundamental truth. The world would not see it that way. The monarchy was built on lineage, on the unbroken chain of succession. What he had just learned would shake that foundation to its core. Charles arrived within the hour, face grey with dread. Summoned but not informed, he now saw William's expression, the envelope on the table, and comprehension dawned. The king tried to speak, tried to form an apology to match the magnitude of the decades-long secret, but the words were hollow, inadequate. How do you apologize for deception spanning decades? even if convinced yourself it was just rumours, gossip that didn't deserve acknowledgement. William could barely look at him, the man he had called father, who taught him duty and responsibility, who prepared him for a role that might not rightfully be his. Whatever love existed now felt buried under betrayal and lost trust. Charles reached out, but William stepped back. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The wound was too fresh, the pain too raw. And as the hours passed and the initial shock began to settle into something he could carry, William realised he faced a choice, one that would define the man he was beyond blood and titles, a choice that could alter the course of his life forever. He could let this destroy him, could hide behind palace walls while lawyers and spokespeople tried to manage the crisis, or he could face it head-on with the same courage and dignity he'd tried to show in every other aspect of his life. The palace was preparing carefully crafted statements, their diplomatic language designed to minimise damage. But William knew those words would ring hollow. The public deserved honesty, not spin. His children deserved a father who faced hard truths rather than hiding from them. Catherine watched him arrive at this decision, saw the shift in his posture from defeated to determined, felt the weight of his resolve. She asked what he was going to do. "I'm going to tell them myself," William said quietly. All of it, the truth in his own words. The advisors objected immediately. Too risky, too emotional. Let the professionals handle it. But William was immovable. This was his life, his identity, his truth to share. Charles, still processing his own guilt and fear, tried to dissuade him. "Think of the monarchy," he pleaded. "Think of the stability, the institutions, the centuries of tradition." But William had thought of all that. He'd thought of nothing else, and he realised that the only way forward, the only way to preserve any integrity at all, was through complete honesty. He would address the nation himself. He would explain what the tests revealed, acknowledge the questions they raised, and face whatever consequences came, not as a prince hiding behind titles and privilege, but as a man confronting the most personal crisis of his life in the most public way possible. The communications team scrambled to arrange it. A televised address was scheduled for that evening, prime time, when the most people would be watching. No script, William insisted. Just him speaking from the heart, sharing a truth that would change everything. As news of the impending address spread, speculation reached fever pitch. The palace confirmed only that Prince William would make an important personal statement, nothing more. The broadcast that changed history. The lights in the palace room were harsh and unforgiving. William sat alone in a simple chair, no grand backdrop, no royal symbols, just a man in a dark suit facing cameras that would carry his words to millions around the world. His hands rested in his lap, steady. The trembling had stopped hours ago, replaced by a calm that came from knowing there was no turning back. In homes across Britain and beyond, families gathered around televisions and phones, sensing something unprecedented was about to happen. The red light blinked on. William looked directly into the camera and began to speak. He didn't use flowery language or royal formality. His words were simple, direct, painfully honest. He told them about receiving a DNA report that raised questions about his paternal lineage. He explained that a second independent test had been conducted to verify the findings. He acknowledged that the results showed genetic discrepancies that couldn't be ignored. His voice remained steady as he spoke about the weight of discovering such information, the personal devastation of having one's identity questioned at its most fundamental level. But he also spoke about responsibility, about the duty to truth that transcended titles and tradition. "I could have hidden this," William said, eyes never leaving the camera. "I could have let lawyers and advisors make this disappear. But I believe that honesty, even painful honesty, is the only foundation worth building on." Around the world, people sat in stunned silence. Social media froze as everyone stopped scrolling to watch. News anchors struggled to maintain professional composure. This wasn't a scandal being exposed by journalists. This was a prince dismantling his own legacy in real time, choosing transparency over protection. William continued explaining that he didn't have all the answers yet. The full history behind the genetic discrepancy was still being investigated, but he refused to ask the public to wait in speculation while he and his family worked behind closed doors. He spoke about his children, his voice finally showing emotion. Whatever questions existed about his own lineage, he wanted them to grow up in a monarchy that valued truth over image, that earned respect through integrity rather than demanding it through tradition. The speech lasted only 12 minutes, but it felt like the world had shifted on its axis. When William finished, there was no dramatic exit, no royal fanfare. He simply stood, nodded to the camera, and walked away. Catherine had been watching just off camera. As William stepped into the shadows, she was there immediately. Her hand found his. That image, the two of them walking away together, unified and strong, would become one of the most shared photographs in history. The reaction was instantaneous and overwhelming. Initial shock gave way to something unexpected: sympathy, respect, even admiration. People had prepared for scandal, for disgrace, for the collapse of the monarchy. Instead, they witnessed courage, vulnerability, a man choosing the harder right over the easier wrong. Social media exploded with support. Not everyone agreed, but most recognized his bravery. It took commentators who had spent careers criticizing the royal family to praise William's integrity. Opinion polls showed his honesty had earned more public trust than decades of carefully managed appearances ever had. But the real work was just beginning. William and Charles, their relationship still fractured but united in purpose, began the painstaking process of uncovering the full truth. They brought in historians, genetic specialists, and trusted advisors to piece together the story behind the DNA results. The investigation was thorough, painful, and illuminating. Old letters were examined, confidential records reviewed, secrets long buried brought into the light. Slowly, the picture became clearer, though some mysteries would never be fully solved. The palace, under William's insistence, adopted a new approach. Regular updates were provided to the public. Not spin, not propaganda, but honest progress reports. When answers weren't available, they said so. When findings were uncomfortable, they shared them anyway. It was revolutionary for an institution built on mystique and careful image control. This transparency felt dangerous, but necessary. The old way had led to this crisis. The new way might be the only path to survival. William threw himself into the work of rebuilding, not just the monarchy's reputation, but his own sense of self. He realized that his worth wasn't determined by whose blood ran through his veins. It was defined by how he lived, what he stood for, how he treated others, and what he built with his own hands and heart. Catherine remained his anchor through it all. When doubt threatened to overwhelm him, when the pressure felt unbearable, she reminded him why they'd chosen this path. Their children were watching. History was watching. They could either hide from hard truths or face them with grace. The crisis that could have destroyed the monarchy became, instead, its transformation. The institution that had resisted change for centuries was forced to evolve, to embrace transparency, to earn legitimacy through character rather than claiming it through birthright. Months passed. The initial frenzy calmed into thoughtful discussion. The investigation continued. Some questions found answers, others remained mysteries, but the public had seen something unprecedented. A royal family being genuinely, vulnerably human. William stood at his window one evening, the city sprawled before him, millions of lives being lived, each person carrying their own struggles and secrets. He thought about how close everything had come to collapse, how one envelope had nearly ended centuries of history. But it hadn't ended. It had transformed. The truth, courage, and transparency he embraced were the reason the monarchy survived and had a chance to thrive anew. And now, William turned to the public with one final request. If you've been inspired by this story, share it, comment your thoughts, like, and subscribe to follow the journey as history continued to unfold.